This video is brought to you by Ground News. Widely referred to as Europe's Trump whisperer, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni made headlines last week by becoming the first European leader to meet with US President Donald Trump since the onset of his trade war with the European Union. While some European leaders have expressed concern about Meloni's close ties with Trump, who has in the past lauded Meloni with praise, fearing that her visit might undermine the EU, many others rallied behind her in hopes that she could persuade the US president to de-escalate his tariff war on the EU. However, whilst the meeting was amicable enough, Meloni left Washington without any tangible solutions. And as the animosity between these former transatlantic allies increases, Meloni's delicate balancing act is coming under increasing strain. So in this video, we're going to explore Meloni's geopolitical juggling, and why she may be soon forced to pick a side. Who's the best politician right now? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. We should probably start by explaining Meloni's Tightrope Act between the two powers on either side of the Atlantic. In essence, Meloni has managed to maintain strong relations with both the EU and Trump, emerging as somewhat of a bridge between Trump and Europe, which has, in turn, helped her advance both her domestic and foreign policy interests. When it comes to Europe, Meloni has gone from being the leader of a marginalised ultra-nationalist party that's also traditionally Eurosceptic to head of one of the most stable governments in post-war Italian history, serving as a bridge and leader between far-right and conservative factions in Europe. She's done so by essentially playing ball in Brussels. For instance, unlike other European far-right leaders, Meloni has been a strong supporter of Ukraine, and further gained the EU's trust after she managed to convince Hungary's Viktor Orban to greenlight a crucial €50 billion aid package to Kiev. As such, unlike other controversial leaders like Orban, whose funding has been blocked for undermining the EU and subverting the rule of law, Meloni has managed to secure support funding for some of her key domestic policies. Furthermore, aided by the power vacuum left by collapsing governments in France and Germany, the two traditional leaders of the bloc, Meloni has been dragging European politics rightwards, especially on issues like immigration. When it comes to Trump, there are a few reasons that Meloni might want to stay in Trump's good books. First, the two are ideologically aligned on quite a few issues, including curbing migration, promoting traditional values, and skepticism towards multilateral institutions. Second, at nearly €40 billion, Italy's trade surplus with the US is the third largest in the EU, behind only Germany and Ireland, and Italy's diminished defence budget, which falls well under the NATO spending target, could otherwise put Italy on a collision course with the new administration in the White House. Thirdly, historically, Italy has maintained close ties with the US as an insurance against the Franco-German axis that dominates EU affairs. After Meloni became the only European head of state invited to Trump's inauguration earlier in the year, Meloni criticised the response of some European leaders who expected Italy to have to choose between Europe and the US. Furthermore, in recent weeks, Meloni has been conspicuously sympathetic to Trump, adopting a softer tone compared to her European partners, and avoiding any public criticism of the US president, with any comments on trade or the push for peace in Ukraine clearly calibrated to avoid antagonising the White House. For instance, when it comes to the tariff war, she's called on the EU to take a softer approach of moderation and negotiation rather than retaliation, warning that retaliatory tariffs could set off a vicious circle in which everyone loses. Then, last week, Meloni visited Trump in the White House after the president invited her as essentially the European representative. A handful of European leaders previously concerned over Meloni's closeness to Trump saw this meeting instead as an opportunity to convince the president to drop his tariffs, after previous attempts by other European leaders, including flattery, threats or promises to buy more American gas, were essentially ignored by Trump. At the meeting, she seemed to have won Trump over, in large part by announcing that her goal is to, quote, make the West great again, and soon after, Trump suggested that a trade deal with Europe could be in sight. However, as European sentiment towards Trump continued to wane, the political risks to Meloni's balancing act are becoming more apparent. Domestically speaking, after almost 2.5 years in power, her governing coalition has been hit by its most serious bout of infighting. Meloni is particularly facing pressure from her two vice premiers who lead the other parties in a coalition, one of them being her Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini. Salvini, who was touted as a potential Prime Minister in the past, has called on Meloni to put her country's interests first and above those of Europe, whilst her Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani has called on Meloni to appease Trump by offering to buy more American goods. As we explained earlier, Italy has a large trade surplus with the United States, so it's no surprise that Meloni is under pressure from her vice premiers as well as Italian exporters to spare them from Trump's tariffs. If she fails to get a quick win for Italy, she'll likely face even more pressure from these two, and from Salvini in particular, who has recently been reaching out to the White House in a bid to raise his own profile, as Meloni has dialed back her enthusiasm for Trump. On the other side of the aisle, much of the EU is increasingly uneasy with Meloni's overtures to Washington. Meloni has worked hard to convince Brussels she's a reliable partner, and could undermine her standing if she blatantly promotes Italian interests by cozying up to Trump at the expense of the other 27 member states. What's more, she risks playing directly into Trump's plan, which seems to be undermining EU unity and signing trade deals with individual countries, which would very much undermine her credibility in Brussels as a European leader. With less than 90 days left until Trump reinstates a 20% tariff on all European imports, if Meloni proves unsuccessful in getting Trump to the table with the EU, or is unable to bargain a good deal for Italy, all in the meantime the transatlantic relationship continues to sour, her delicate balancing act will likely blow up. There's a lot to unpack here though, with this story reported on by more than 350 sources. Interestingly, we can see that of those, 28% came from left-leaning outlets, while 25% came from outlets that lean right. Looking at the headlines, you can also see some differences, with left-leaning outlets framing Meloni's meeting with Trump with skepticism, emphasising potential risks to transatlantic relations and highlighting her alignment with Trump on curbing migration and their skepticism towards multilateral institutions. Conversely, right-leaning outlets portrayed Meloni as a close ally and potential power broker who could mediate between the US and Europe, emphasising her desire to strengthen ties. We're able to do that because of our sponsor Ground News, whose incredible website and app lets you discover the news and pulls back the curtain on media bias. Built by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news, with Ground News ingesting over 50,000 articles from all over the world, and then organising each by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of reporting sources, where these sources lean on the political spectrum at an individual level and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article all without ever leaving the app. But one of the best parts of the app is their blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on by one side of the aisle or the other, helping you better break out of your media bubble and discover what those on the other side of the political spectrum are really saying. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the unlimited Access Vantage plan using the link in the description, or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.